So, hi Shane, how are you?
Hey Deirdre, how's the form?
Good, good, good. So,
Good.
we are gathered here together on behalf of Garter Lane and for National Poetry Day to have a chat about your work, about your new piece. What's the name of the piece that we're going to watch or that people will get a chance to watch?
The piece we're going to be watching is Man Oh Man is Burning, and it was filmed down in Blessington Lakes.
Brilliant. So, will you introduce yourself briefly and so people can get an idea of who you are?
Of course, my name is Shane Keeling. I'm a multidisciplinary visual artist that specializes in ceramic and sculpture. My work tackles difficult, often taboo subjects in Irish culture, such as grief and suicide. I'm also a part of the international collective Boys Don't Cry. Our aim is to bring the discussion of mental health within the creative industry and show how having a creative outlet can help combat the recent and horrifying upsurge of male suicides. Um, yeah, so that's kind of who I am.
So, the piece that we're about to watch is a combination of film and poetry and your ceramic and visual art practice. And so, has poetry always been a part of your practice, or was this a new development?
No, poetry has always been an integral part of my process since my final year in college. I was trying to discover new ways of writing about my work, and I found that restricting myself to a rhythm and rhyming words really helped me to get to the root of what it is I was wanting to make my work about, and really get to the root of the emotions that I was feeling. So it's always been integral. It's always kind of pointed me in the direction I want to take my work in, and like you think so much quicker than you can speak, and sometimes having all those thoughts can be quite overwhelming. So then when I restricted myself, I can kind of get to the core of who I am as a person, I suppose, through my words.
Like a distillation, I
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and then, so was poetry like? Did you read any poetry growing up, or through your life?
Just by the ones that you would have had to have done in like secondary school, Sylvia Plath and all that jazz. But I think most of my references would come from rap music. I'd be into my hip hop music and stuff, Tribe Called Quest, and then there's new people like Bakar, and then there's the Irish scene like Kojak and all. Those people are inspiring me to kind of write poetry. So I'd probably write my poetry um, as a rap nearly, you know what I mean? And then I perform it in a spoken word. So yeah, that's where my influence for poetry would come from.
And I think that's actually clear when I'm thinking about it now,
Mm.
when I listened to the piece and watched the piece. And so this is really a synthesis of these three art forms. And would do you think that you would have ever made a poetry film like this if it hadn't been for COVID?
Um, no, 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 no. I think the restrictions that came with COVID kind of inspired this piece to come to fruition. I had initially planned on burning this sculpture in a gallery in a show that we were setting up. Me and a couple of my mates are setting up, and I was going to perform the poetry there, but with restrictions, everything was postponed and delayed, and eventually just cancelled. So I was kind of forced to adapt and find new ways to disseminate the work, and that's kind of how this whole thing came together. Which I'm very grateful now because like this is going to live far longer than a one night burning. You know what I mean? Now I have a piece of art that will live beyond my time even, which is great.
And the themes of the piece, like, so you've talked about mental health and masculinities, and there definitely seems to be like a thread of that runs through the language in the piece. But tell us about the original sculpture that gets burnt, because you can't really see that, and I didn't know much about that actual piece that we see getting set alight.
Yeah. Well, the sculpture is it's compiled of 36 broken vases in the silhouette of a hanging body. I was interested in kind of um, I was researching masculinity and initially intended that sculpture on being a celebration of masculinity. But the more research that I did, the more I came across some horrifying stats. And I had to kind of look inwards and in a way to better understand my surroundings. Like, and I started to think, like, many groups of males don't allow each other to display feelings outside of aggression and manliness. And anyone who displays feelings beyond it are ridiculed and emasculated and made to feel inadequate by their peers and also by even members of their family, you know. And this leads to a culture of men that are performing hyper masculinity. And these men are then terrified of displaying maybe their true emotions, you know, and being open about their mental health in fear of being rejected by other men. Like I went to an all-boys secondary school where social status was defined by how cool your car was, how many girls you'd been with, how good you were at sport, or if you could fight, you know. Like I know now that these things really don't matter, but it took a lot of introspective work and a whole lot of and a long time to untangle these rigid views of masculinity that are instilled in me by my peers and by male role models. But the more that I think about it, like the more that it became clear that like this idealized version of masculinity just doesn't work for most men, you know. Like not only is it damaging for the people that are desperate to try and fit into the boxes that are made, but it's also having a huge impact on the men who make the boxes, you know. I think if we created a culture where it was okay to be vulnerable and that was a safe space for men to be able to talk amongst each other about these sort of problems, about their mental health, then maybe we wouldn't have the fourth highest suicide rate for young men in Europe, you know? And maybe suicide wouldn't be one of the biggest killers of men in Ireland. And like we've got to try and change the narrative that being a hard man is cool. Like we got to try and make being soft the new hard, if that makes sense. And like we gotta have to start asking ourselves, is it more manly to have these courageous conversations with your friends that could potentially save their lives and or your life, depending on your situation? Or is it more courageous to kick a ball over the bar? Because I know which one I think is more manly.
I mean, I agree with you, and there's elements of that for sure in the spoken word of the piece that I understand, and it's great to hear you so passionately speaking about it. And does it feel so? But that wouldn't necessarily be as clearly communicated in the visual, I guess. So in that way, is it more exposing to write poetry or to speak poetry? Then is it easier to hide behind? I mean, not that anyone who's got a strong visual arts practice is hiding anything, but is it less opaque and more transparent? Is it more exposing to add this layer of spoken word on top of it?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. The visual art is great, but and I like the ambiguity of the visual art. You know what I mean? It's a fantastic outlet to have, but people are able to put their own selves into the piece. Then, you know, whereas when I'm speaking my thoughts and my words over it, it definitely exposes me a lot more and makes me more vulnerable, and it also directs the narrative. So yeah, it is. I feel a little bit naked, let's say, if I'm when I'm doing spoken word in comparison to my visual art. I always said when I first started making art and displaying it, and particularly art about mental health, that it felt like one of those dreams, you know, where you're naked in a swimming pool and everyone else is clothed and everyone's like pointing at you and you're so vulnerable. Like that's what it kind of felt like at the start. And then that's kind of wore off after I started doing more and more exhibitions. But I feel like I'm naked again with this with the spoken words.
There's something that somebody has said about, you know, once something is really difficult, and then you keep doing it, it gets easier, and that's the moment when you need to do the really hard thing again. So it sounds to me like in terms of that process, the exposure that you felt at the very beginning, maybe you're digging deeper into that again. And it feels to me like your message is so important for young men coming up, that they can be visual artists that can also consider these big things and make a difference with their art, or at least begin to start conversations with their art. And so the setting is really beautiful in the visual piece. How did that all come about? Or do you often work collaboratively, because you had to have a team on board for this?
I'd work collaboratively in terms of talking about my work with people. That really helps me to gauge how people might be feeling about it, and I get a lot out of having those conversations with other artists, or even with people that aren't involved in art at all. You know, getting different perspectives. But yeah, I worked with a team, a brother and sister, the Feelings, Aisling Feeling, great videographer, and then Ben Phelan did the score for the piece as well. So it was kind of like my first collaborative piece. But they plugged all the holes and made the piece what it is. Like I just had a sculpture that I wanted to set on fire and the words, whereas they had all the equipment and the expertise to make it into the piece of film that it is. Like, so yeah, the collaborative work was great, and it's definitely something that I'll do again in the future. And it's important to know your weaknesses, I think, and to surround yourself with people that can bring you up then, you know. And everyone working together was really beautiful, and the reward from it was amazing. So
not at all. Well, you've made a really beautiful piece and everybody should be very proud of it. And I'm looking forward to everybody who's watching this video getting a chance to see it now. So just to thank you for talking about the work. For me, as not a visual arts person, it's really fascinating to hear some of the story that goes into things. So I had one impression when I watched the work, and now it has another layer. So when I watch it again, it has a whole different element. So thanks a million, Shane. Lovely to meet you.
You too, Deirdre. That was great.
Enjoy the film, everybody. Bye.
Bye.